So what better way to start than with a magic show? So I'm going to start with an industrial waste stream. I will tell you about it in its life, number one, and then we're going to do a little hocus pocus and turn it into something else. So first up, we have she already forewarned me that the pointer's a little, there we go, the big mining tires. These are the surface mines, coal mines, Gillette, Wyoming, gold mines, Elko, Nevada, the copper mines of Globe, Arizona. Just like a car tire, these are a wear part.
I'm not so sure your microphone's on.
Is my microphone not on?
I can hear you.
He says it's on. I'll speak louder. I usually get told to talk softer.
Look on the mic, maybe the button needs to be
Oh, I thought I could hear myself. Better. Oh, my Broadway voice gets a little projection. Yeah. I like this crowd. It's interactive. This is not a debits and credits and parts per million talk. This is going to be fun. Just like your car tires. They're a wear part. What happens to them in a second life other than going in the landfill? Hocus pocus. You cut it in half, slice it in half like a bagel, throw it out in a cattle pasture. Fill that center hub with concrete, and you have a stock tank, a water tank, that'll last an additional 50 to 75 years. Next up, it's fun coming here, home of a major national college basketball program. But what happens to old gym floors? Most of them in middle schools, high schools, colleges get sanded and refinished 1, 2, maybe 3 times. And if you're a woodworker, each sanding takes a little layer off, and you get close to the tongue and grooves, and you can't sand them a 3rd and 4th time. So what happens to them? This happens to be Cal Berkeley. Many of you are probably familiar with them. So we cut it out in 4x8 sections and take it out and if it's not repurposed, they typically bring in a skid steer and they'll just scrape it, shatter it, rip it apart because it's just going in the landfill. And that's what happens to most of these gym floors. Hocus pocus. This happens to be Michael Jordan's restaurant, and you can see what they did with an old gym floor. They made a feature wall out of it. They took it apart board by board, reassembled it on the back wall, so the 3-point lines, the foul lines, the out-of-bounds lines all don't connect back together properly, but it makes a fun, whimsical feature wall. Obviously, kind of fun that it's Michael Jordan, where he made his fame and fortune. Next up, we've seen them all in our subdivisions and our HOAs on our streets, street sweepers. So what we're specifically talking about is the red tube broom between the axles. So in First Life, they're 5 feet tall, 8-inch diameter steel pipe, plastic bristles sticking out all 360 degrees, and they start out about 36 inches. And as it spins, collecting dirt, it's a wear part. So those bristles get shorter and shorter and shorter. When they get to about 22 to 24 inches, they don't reach the street anymore. So it's obsolete, no longer good. Again, plastic can be recycled, steel can be recycled, but there's not enough of either component to make it worth the labor to cut it apart and recycle it. So, what do you do with an old street sweeper brush? Any livestock owners? Hocus pocus. They make a great back scratcher for livestock in a second life. So zoos all over the country call us. It was interesting. This was a few years ago. The Bronx Zoo, New York City calls, and they wanted a couple of these for their rhinoceros pens. And I said, okay, that's great. We did the transaction. I said, ma'am, but don't you have street sweeper brushes right there in your own New York City? She said, yeah, but our streets are dirty here in New York City. So there's this perception, and I think it's due to Coors beer, that everything's cleaner in Colorado. So if you go to the rhinoceros pen in New York City at the Bronx Zoo, and there's a blue brush, that's a Colorado street sweeper brush where the streets are much cleaner. So these have been in big industrial waste streams. So you were a kid, or you had little kids. Let's bring it down to size. The Quaker Oats cylinder, life number 1, meant to protect the oatmeal from factory to store, retail store to home. The last little oatmeal was dumped out. As a little kid, as a parent, did it ever go right in the recycle bin? Probably not. St. Patrick's Day, Thanksgiving's coming up, all kinds of crafts you can do with a old Quaker Oats cylinder as in a life number 2. The Maytag refrigerator box, going a little bit bigger. Life number 1, meant to protect a high-value appliance like a refrigerator from Maytag, Kenmore, whoever, manufacturer, to retail store, to home. As a little kid, did you ever let that go right in the, oh, let's cut that up into small chunks and send it to the recycler? Probably not. All kinds of fun things you can do. A fort, a playhouse, something. But it's interesting in a land of abundance, which is America. You know, we go to Amazon. We used to go to Toys R Us. We go to Walmart. We need new, brand new, shiny, clean plastic things, playhouses, etc. When a resourceful kid can figure out what to do for hours and hours of extended fun with these old refrigerator boxes. So just to define some terms, she already said reduce, reuse, recycle. We're all very familiar. So for 50, 60 years, all the focus and all the love has been given to recycling. But what is recycling? You have to chip it, shred it, grind it, melt it. You have to size reduce, and then it becomes raw material to be put back into the manufacturing process. That's recycling. Again, nothing wrong with this. A lot of times, if you guys are familiar with the EPA's hierarchy of waste, the worst thing you can do with waste, landfill, next best, is waste to energy, burn it, and you use the heat to create power. Better than that is recycling. But at the top of the food chain, the highest and best use of waste is always reuse. So I often make the comment that who is a ardent sustainability guy, one of the most famous guys, but you never think about him being a sustainability person? It's the plaid-jacketed used car salesman. Because he's peddling used cars. So instead of crushing these cars and crushing the metal to make an I-beam someday, let's keep that Subaru, let's keep that Ford on the road. Reuse. Typical reuse is a boat, a forklift, and a refrigerator. So if you get a brand new boat and you decide your used boat is no longer good, you put it on Facebook Marketplace, you put it on Craigslist, and somebody purchases it from you, what's going to happen with that boat, forklift, or refrigerator in life number 2 with the new owner? Guess what? Stays the same. They're specialized. So if I drive a Ford pickup. It's got 330,000 miles on it. But if I decide I want to replace it, the next guy's probably going to use it as a pickup truck. So that's reuse. Repurposing, by contrast, is meaning it gets a very different second life. So you think about the examples I've already shown you. Life number 2 is very different. So by illustration, I'm going to give you 3 examples, and I bet you when I'm done with this, oh, Damon, I'm going to sleep. I know about these. You know, come on, let's pick up the program. Let's pick up the pace. But all 3 of these examples I'm about ready to show you, there's such a common repurpose that you probably really don't think about it being a repurpose, a very different life number 2. Well, we're at college. Any wine drinkers? Is that a good thing to ask at a college campus? Wine barrels. We're all familiar. They age wine, sometimes spirits. A lot of the craft brewers will take a once-used wine barrel and age a craft beer in them, but usually they're used no more than 2 times. In life number 1, very specialized, the oak, staves, but they can use 2 times. What happens to them? Everybody knows the answer. You go to Lowe's, Home Depot, Menards in the spring, they cut them in half and they become flower pots. Actually, there's all kinds of things creative people do with an old wine barrel in life number 2, but I'm guessing nobody is surprised. Everybody's familiar with this one. So we talked about the big, tall, 10-foot tall, 12-foot tall mining tires, but semi-truck tires, car tires. What's another repurpose? Very different second life for car tires and truck tires. Well, When I give this talk, I'm from Colorado. When I give this talk in Nebraska or Oklahoma, everybody's, I don't know. I mean, what? You guys are in Philadelphia. Hocus pocus. Hocus pocus. Hocus pocus. Oh. So tires for years, for decades, have been used as bumpers or fenders on tugboats and in dock marine applications. So the Ohio River, the Mississippi River, Port of Long Beach, Port of Savannah. Again, this is not why Goodyear and Michelin made these tires to be great dock fenders. It just happens that resourceful, enterprising marine people have figured out decades ago that it's a great life number two. Next up, the ocean containers. 20 foot, 40 foot are standard sizes. We're familiar, they bring imports, exports, right here from Philadelphia, New York City, etc. So, besides my wife, any HGTV watchers? There we go. There's one person that will admit it. Or maybe there's several people that will admit it. So what happens to, and oftentimes these shipping containers are one-trippers. They make one voyage, either direction, and then they're rendered obsolete to the shipping industry. Hocus pocus, you're probably all familiar. They get turned into tiny houses, construction trailers, etc., etc. So now I'm going to move to three more less familiar repurposes. So first up, we're going to play the. It's going to ruin my magic show if it goes too early. So the advertising billboard vinyls, highways, byways of America, Coke, Chevrolet, Budweiser, in this case McDonald's, $1.99 daily doubles. Well, at some point that advertising campaign is over, concludes. Well, they may, if they never going to have a $1.99 Big Mac again, that printed picture on a piece of heavy-duty waterproof vinyl is obsolete. What happens to it? All the trial lawyers' advertising is obsolete. When they change the name of the firm, they change their branding, their slogans, etc. What happens to all these, or what could happen to all these billboard vinyls in life number two? Hocus pocus. It's waterproof vinyl. All kinds of things you can do in a second life. Here they're covering building materials. Now, most people that repurpose these will turn them over because they don't want Mickey Mouse on their building materials or whatever happens to be, or a trial lawyer. But hay tarps, all kinds of things. Some people will go inverted with them as pond liners. And if you want to be the all-American parent or grandparent, you ask for one that's white on the backside. That's the minority, but some are white. Why do you ask for a white one? Well, in the daytime, you put it on a hill, put a garden hose, and you got a slip and slide for your kids. At night, you let it dry out, you hang it between two trees, and it becomes an excellent projector screen for a backyard movie. Get the popcorn out. So, very fun life number twos for old billboard vinyls. Next up, aluminum bleachers. All of us have sat on these at softball games, football games, etc. These are usually replaced for one of two reasons. They're upgrading their seating to nicer seating, or they may have ADA, Americans with Disability Acts, compliance issues, so they have to reconfigure their bleachers to make it more accessible. Now, there's one other reason, well, probably more than one, but any NASCAR fans? Okay, we got one. We got one that admits it. So, does anybody know the history of NASCAR? It is a backwoods, redneck sport, and then in the 90s, what happened? It just, everybody started watching NASCAR. All the racetracks started expanding. Man, they couldn't sell enough tickets, so we got to build bigger grandstands. Well, unfortunately, what happened to NASCAR about 10 years later? You know, it was a novelty act for 5-10 years. So what was happening is they weren't selling the stands out anymore, so it was very bad from a marketing standpoint. So when they would pan, CBS, Fox would pan, the stands would be half full. I mean, that's a really bad marketing look. So resourceful marketing people said, well, let's tear down a bunch of stands So if they're half full, we're at least going to tear out half the stands, and then the stands look full. So when they pay in the race, the stands look full. So there's another reason, marketing, that these bleachers come down. Reduce, reuse, recycle. What happens to most of these? They get in the big excavators, track hose, they scrape them out, they bend them, they twist them, they go into a big dumpster, and they get sent off to be melted down and made into a soda can. That would be recycling. But we're thinking about reuse. Let's keep them as a bleacher. Hocus pocus. This is a very enterprising interior designer who used it as wall cladding. This happens to be a sports office at a university. How fitting is that? Any boat owners? Excellent tread on a boat dock. It's aluminum. It's not going to rust, ever. Probably, maybe in Pennsylvania. Certainly in Colorado, where we're from. Great treads for snowmobile trailers. Because you think about it, you get done snowmobiling, all that snow and ice built up on your machine. As you get to warmer weather, put it in the garage, it's all going to melt. I mean, you got a big water problem, so why not have aluminum decking on there that's not going to rust or disintegrate over time? Any veterans? A veteranless audience. These are the big, massive DoD, Department of Defense, Army parachutes. Notice these are not the ones that are the soldiers. You can see they're dropping pallets of rations. They might be dropping Humvees. They might be dropping tanks. These are giant parachutes. 30 foot, 60 foot, 100 foot in diameter. That's 30 yards. That's a third of a football field wide. Okay, guys, we dropped a Jeep today, but I'm starting to see that parachute fray a little bit. Do you think we could get one more usage out of that parachute? We're dropping a $10 million piece of equipment. No. They retire them. They take them out of service. What could you do with an old parachute, big jumbo parachute, in life number 2? Hocus pocus. This happens to be a Shakespeare theater in Wisconsin. Make a great shade canopy to protect the actors and the audience from the sun. Interestingly, any guesses as to the number one buyer of a used military parachute? I think the song is Here Comes the Bride. Oh, she said it? I don't think anybody has ever got it right. Number one buyer are brides for backyard weddings. They'll put these up as a shade canopy, run Christmas lights up in it, have fun with it. So shade canopy at a backyard wedding. Probably number 2 is high schools for proms. So if they're having it in their gymnasium, that's kind of a boring. So they'll put these, drape them up, and have a kind of a fun canopy over their high school proms. So next up, how do you get all these crazy repurposing ideas? So I have an insomnia problem, so I get trade journals from all kinds of industries. Any fellow subscribers to Wire, Rope, and Sling Technology News in the audience? And what I do is I read and I look at the ads. What products are being made new using new raw materials, new resources that somewhere across the state, across the nation, somebody else is throwing away, retiring something that's eerily similar. So it's kind of hard to see, but these are sling guard protectors. So you got your high value sling carrying every day, hours at a time, these 20,000 pound steel coils. It's a 90-degree angle. It's a wear part. Pretty soon that weight and that 90-degree angle is going to start cutting into that sling. And eventually it frays and won't carry the weight anymore, so they retire it. This enterprising company makes a tough jacketed sock sleeve-like material that's tough jacketed. That becomes the wear part, much less expensive, so you put that sock on there, it frays, it wears, and when it gets to the point where it can't handle it anymore, it gets retired, but a much cheaper thing goes on, and the sling, the one actually doing the work, stays intact. Where in America are tens of thousands of feet of tough jacketed sock-like material being landfilled every year. Sorry, we're at Villanova, so this has got some pop quizzes for you. We've got one A student already, so what is fire hose? Tough jacketed, sock-like material. So, Philadelphia, city of Philadelphia, yesterday we fought a 5-alarm fire. I mean, the building was burning down and we used a fire hose, but every 5 years, this is hypothetical, every 5 years we replace all of our fire hose. So yesterday we fought a 5-alarm fire with this fire hose, but today, oh, here's the pallets of brand new fire hose. Pull all that fire hose off those fire trucks, put the brand new stuff on. What happens to it? Many cases it goes to the landfill. So we ask the question, upper left, substitutionary thinking. Could we not cut that into 3-foot, 9-foot, 6-foot, 12-foot lengths in this case and use it as a poor man's sling guard protector? Any boat owners? I already asked the question, but lots and lots of boat owners will take old fire hose, and you think about, let's just say this is the boat dock, and remember Christmas candy, the ribbon candy that kind of goes like this? They'll do that on the sides of the boat docks with old fire hose, and you have a poor man's boat dock bumper or fender. So, extended life for an old fire hose. Fellow subscribers to Poultry USA. Now, come on, guys. How many like Chick-fil-A? I mean, how many like omelets? I mean, it's a big industry in America. So here's my rated PG-13 comment. So I was doing this conference one time, and somebody raised their hand and said, "Yeah, I get that magazine." I said, "Oh my!" It's kind of, "Oh, you get that magazine?" He says, "Yeah, I like to look at the chicks." Substitutionary thinking. So what you can't see, it's really small, but it's nest pad. 1.5-inch plastic shag carpeting that's rolled under the cages where the hens lay their eggs, so as it drops to 2 or 3 inches, it's cushioning. 1.5-inch plastic shag carpeting because obviously they don't want the eggs to crack. Yep, the pop quiz is coming. Where in America are hundreds of thousands of square feet of 1.5-inch plastic shag carpeting being landfilled every year? What is? She got it? Wow, another A student. What is turf today from football fields? Most of it's made to last 6 to 8 years. 1.5-inch plastic shag carpeting. Yes, modern day turf has the rubber and sand infill, because when you watch the football games, you can see it. You'll see it when they're sweating. You'll see the little rubber pellets sticking to them. But what is it? It's 1.5-inch plastic shag carpeting. When I was giving this conversation one time in Colorado, and a CU fan, University of Colorado, Deion Sanders University right now, said, "Have you ever gotten CSU, Colorado State, the arch rivals, football field? I would like some, and I would like the end zone." You're a CU fan. Why would you like Colorado State's end zone? He said, "Because it doesn't get used very often." So, substitutionary thinking. I don't know if it's going to work in the poultry industry, but it's eerily similar. Maybe it can. So now we come to the historical part. Sometimes we get asked, did you invent repurposing? Well, that would be certainly an insult to your forefathers, your parents, your grandparents who lived through the Great Depression. Did they throw stuff away? No. We're at a nice Catholic university. Did you guys know that repurposing is in the Old Testament? Book of Isaiah. After a war, they would turn their swords into plowshares. Very, very famous scripture. It's so famous that it is a sculpture, and that verse is inscripted at the United Nations in New York City. So think about a sword, wood, you got a metal or a stone tip on it for killing in the war, but the war's over, they bend it, and they turn it into a farm implement. Swords into plowshares. So it's, in fact, very old concept. Let's go with 2 war examples. So let's go to World War II. So we already talked about the big military, or the big cargo parachutes, 30 foot, 60 foot, 100 foot in length. But notice this is the ones dropping the soldiers, much smaller in diameter. Fall 1945. What's concluded? World War II. So there's no threat of imminent war, so we send all the GIs, bring them back to America. But because there's no war pressing, a lot of the supplies are left behind. So, very, very enterprising olive farmers, hocus pocus, decided that they could use these as a labor-saving device. So you think about olive farming, not unlike almond farming or any kind of nut. They shake the tree and all the, in this case, olives fall to the ground. Well, the olives will fall over the entire diameter of the canopy of the tree. So you're picking up 1 olive, you're picking up 3 olives, you're picking up 2 olives. It takes a long time to collect all the olives from underneath the olive tree. Resourceful farmers figured out you slice it, a parachute, from outside to inside and use it as a tree skirt like you do at Christmas time. Put it underneath the olive tree. You shake the tree, all the olives fall down. You get on the outsides and you lift the skirts up, and what happens? All the olives roll to the center, and then you're picking up handfuls at a time. So here, a cast-off of military operations, a discard, gets a very productive life number 2 at an olive farm. Let's jump ahead 2 wars. For those military historians, anybody recognize this jet? The F-4 Phantom. What we're talking about is the thing on the bottom of the fuselage that looks like a missile or a bomb, but in fact, it's a jettison, or it's an external fuel tank. So they want to fly the sortie deeper into enemy territory. So they fill this with fuel. They burn that fuel first, and then they hit a button and it drops. So it saves weight, it's better aerodynamic, so they burn that. So it's a one-time use external fuel tank. In the 60s, early 70s, the jungles of Southeast Asia were littered with these jettisoned external fuel tanks. What's the problem they're trying to solve in Southeast Asia? Hocus pocus, I'll let you do it. Instead of cutting down a brand new tree, a living tree, and hollowing it out to make a canoe, they would take these jettisoned fuel tanks and carve them out, put an outboard motor on the back, and I'm told today, 60, 70 years later, these are still traversing the waterways of Southeast Asia. So, hocus pocus. So now we come to the academic portion. It's fun to be at a college, so you can get out your pen and paper. What makes a material a candidate for repurposing? First up, SAVE, standardized. The more standardized and uniform a waste stream, the more it's a candidate for repurposing. A pile of wood. If the call comes in, I got 2x4s, 2x6s, plywood, 32 inches, 84 inches, and 103 inches. It's just a random pile of mismatched lumber versus the business that calls in and says, we need 93-inch 2x4s. Home Depot, they don't sell 93-inch 2x4s. They sell 96, 8 foot. So they cut off 3 inches. Hypothetical example. But we do hundreds of them. So they got hundreds of pieces of 2x4s that are 3 inches. Uniform and standard. Much easier to find that second life because it's all standardized. Next up. Availability. Is this a one-time waste stream or is this recurring? Think about all the examples so far. Military cargo parachutes. Somewhere in America, there's an outdoor advertising company, maybe Orlando, Florida for Disney, it may be Las Vegas, advertising all the casinos. Somewhere, billboard vinyls are being changed out today. McDonald's $1.99 ad campaign is over. So it's always nice when it's a recurring waste stream because if you figure out that second life, or second lives, plural, there's more coming behind it. Very most important, versatility. We use it as in a trivecta of words, generic, versatile, and adaptable, to demonstrate The chair you're sitting on. Look at your neighbor's chair. You got metal, sort of 90-degree angles. You got some interesting casters. You got some blue fabric, and it's probably a little bit cushiony. So if Villanova University decides they're done with them and they put it on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, what's the person that buys them probably going to do with it? Probably going to keep them as a chair. It's specialized. By contrast, let's look at the doors in the back of the room. So, they're tearing this building down. You know, you take the hardware off, you take the push bars off, you take the hinges off. You just got, in that case, a steel panel. How many people have in their garage an old door, you go horizontal with it and make a shelf out of it? So, generic, versatile, adaptable. By way of demonstration, 500-gallon propane tank, life number 1, at rural residences. And they fill these with propane, and that becomes their source of fuel to heat their homes during the winter. Get retired for different reasons, but epitomizes generic, versatile, adaptable, because if they're GVA, typically there's more than one application for it in a second life. Any carnivores? So they become smokers or barbecuers. To go up the food chain, if you're a carnivore, you show it to a livestock owner, and they're going to cut it in half long ways and make a feed trough out of it. Now, if you're really good at geometry, you're really good with a cutting torch, and you're really good with a welder, you take all the angles and invert them and weld them back together, and you got a park bench. So GVA, generic, versatile, and adaptable, that's a huge, huge key to whether a material is a candidate for repurposing. Next up, E, engineering. We also use this with 3 words, ACE, ACE, attributes, characteristics, and engineering. What did it do in life number 1? What did the material do in life number 1? Was it UV protective? Was it flexible? Was it rigid? Did it float? What did it do in life number 1? So what second application could there be that maybe some of those attributes, characteristics, and engineering could come into play and extend its life? So we've already talked about, but it's interesting. So I don't know if you've been raised around livestock or not, but you put a brand new galvanized metal stock tank out in a pasture. Week number 1, a 1,500-pound bull jumps in there and decides to have an 8-second rodeo, and your tank is ruined. 1 week. By contrast, you put a 1,500-pound bull in an old mining tire. He invites his brother in there. Let's have a rodeo. 8 seconds, 16 seconds, 32 seconds, 64 seconds. Pretty soon the bulls all get tired and they jump out. Goodyear and Michelin put 2 and 3 inches of steel and rubber in those tires, not for life number 2, but for life number 1, hauling these big, heavy dump trucks. But it's that 2 and 3 inches of rubber. The 1,500-pound bulls had a little rodeo, and they flexed a little bit. Bulls got tired, they jumped out. It's going to last 50 to 75 years. Notice attributes, characteristics, and engineering. Lower right, one of its primary attributes on that old mining tire is missing. What's missing? Yeah, I heard it. There's no tread. Tires have tread, unless you're a race car. So they got rid of life number 1. They wore it down, wore all the tread off, but for life number 2, that attribute wasn't even necessary for life number 2. Let's go to the rail industry. So these are the big flat cars, 40 foot, 60 foot, 70 foot in diameter. These typically get retired because the axles and the hitches, interestingly, in the railroad world, they're referred to as the knuckles and the trucks. So it's just always funny how industries call the same thing. You know, if you take your car to get it fixed, it's parts and labor. If you're in the construction industry, it's time and materials. Same thing, it's just everybody has their own vocabulary. So at 30, 40 years, these get retired, typically cut into 3-foot chunks and melted, recycling. But if it's the axles and the hitches that are the problem, What are the big long I-beams doing? I mean, think about attributes, characteristics, and what are they doing? They're spanning. That's a big hint. They're spanning the axles. So, if the wear part, the problem, these become obsolete, are the axles and the knuckles, can we not just remove those and span something else? Span, in this case, bridge abutments. So, no DOT is going to go for this. No big city municipality is going to go for this. But how many bridges are on private property that aren't highly regulated? Forestry companies, ranches, on and on and on. Golf courses, hiking trails. So instead of melting it down, sending it to Cleveland to be melted, sending it to Chicago to be made into an I-beam to bring back to Pennsylvania to be installed as a brand new bridge, could we not just keep it what it is and extend its life? Oh, now it gets fun. So notice SAVE. I said that's what makes things a candidate for repurposing. Just because something's a candidate doesn't mean it's going to be commercially viable. So now we're going to talk about some fails. Hot air balloon fabric. I already talked about that the parachutes make a great repurpose item. Brides, proms, Shakespeare theaters. Hot air balloon fabric is virtually the same stuff. In fact, it's got one more attribute. It's colorful. Could you imagine if your prom was, well, it wouldn't be prom for Christmas colors, but if you had a Christmas colored theme event, the red and green would be awesome. Why are parachutes commercially viable and hot air balloon fabric is not? Pop quiz. No one to date ever has gotten this one right. And nobody's being the risk taker and throwing out ideas, which is fine. I'll just get right to the punchline. End of life, you talk to any hot air balloon pilot. End of life, they absolutely reek. You think about it. You know, the propane, all the fumes, the moisture that's being created. I don't know if anybody's ever taken a hot air balloon ride. Where do they land? Wherever. It might be in somebody's cattle pasture. Do you think, oh my gosh, let's get this wadded up, let's get it on the trailer, let's get out of here before we scare the cattle, start a stampede? They're never allowed to dry. They're never allowed to air out. You talk to any hot air balloon pilot, in end of life, they absolutely reek. Backyard wedding, you're sitting there. Not a good look. So it's interesting how things that are candidates may not become commercially viable. 2 jetliners a week, American Airlines calls, and they said, we replace 2 inflatable evacuation slides a week on our jets. They sent me this picture. This is their hangar in DFW. We can't use them anymore. FAA rules. They got to be replaced. I looked at that and I said, oh my gosh, that would be a party barge behind a speedboat. Oh man, that would be so much fun on a lake. GVA, generic, versatile, adaptable. We put this in our newsletter, and a zookeeper reaches out and said, oh my gosh, those would make great fall pads when we anesthetize the big animals. And I was blown away, because it's interesting, when our kids were little, like most parents, grandparents, you take your kids to the zoo, but we're on the front side of the zoo. We're looking in at the lions and the tigers and the monkeys, but we have no idea what's going on behind the scenes, the back operations. But this zookeeper, very familiar, said, they should make great fall pads. So, my wife is in the audience, and she is the punchline of this joke. So I go home to tell my wife, Tracy. I said, Tracy, this is unbelievable. This zookeeper calls, and when they are anesthetizing the big animals, she suggested these would make great fall pads. And Tracy just looks at me, and she got a tear in her eye. I said, why are you crying? And she says, Damon, that's so sad. They're killing the big animals. I said, I didn't say euthanize. I said anesthetize. So they're just putting the big animals to sleep. They don't want them to get hurt while they tranquilize them, but they're going to wake up, Tracy. They're going to wake up. One reason why these will never make great party barges on a lake or great fall pads at a zoo. FAA rules, they have to be certifiably destroyed. They have to be shredded. So, I mean, it makes sense. They don't want these ending up on third world airlines. Tracy and I were just in Africa a month ago. So when we took off in Eswatini to fly back to Johannesburg Airport, it was good to know that that wasn't a 15-year-old inflatable slide on that jet if we were to have problems. So while you get it, it is very sad and frustrating that, I mean, this has all kinds of interesting possible second lives. Next up, speaking of airports, we've all touched them 1,000 times, hundreds of thousands of times. Escalator handrail, generic, versatile, adaptable, available, versatile, great engineering, rubber, steel cables running through it. One reason these will never become commercially viable is because probably the number one idea for these is landscape edging to separate the flower bed from the grass. Well, and this is hypothetical. I haven't checked my pricing in a while, but you can go to Lowe's, Home Depot, Menards, and get brand new galvanized metal landscape edging, let's say, for 50 cents a foot. You can't even ship this stuff for 50 cents a foot because it's so big and heavy. So it breaks down economically. So those are three examples. Just because something's a candidate for repurposing doesn't mean it's commercially or will be commercially viable. So to date, we talked about all materials. But if you take this concept and you go broader with it, there's all kinds of additional unused, obsolete, discarded, cast-off things that can get a second life. Sugar. Coors Beer calls. Golden, Colorado. They brought in a bunch of sugar from Hawaii to make a specialty holiday brew. And for whatever reason, there was 30,000 pounds of sugar left. That's 3/4 of a semi-load. And guess what? There was a little date on the bags of sugar. And it reached its expiration date. So no longer good for human consumption. Couldn't be used in chocolate chip cookies. Couldn't be used in Kool-Aid. 30,000 pounds. So if we think about recycling, what would be the recycling thing you would do with this? Would be to send it to compost and turn it into dirt. That would be equivalent to recycling. But if we're thinking reuse, use it as is, what do you do with 30,000 pounds of expired sugar? A very enterprising beekeepers took the whole load. I'm going to make sugar water to supplement the bees' diets when the flowers aren't blooming. Sir, that's great, but you do know that this is expired, right? His response, do you think the bees care? Cheese. What's the big problem in the cheese industry? At the retail level, at the wholesale level, if you don't sell it fast enough, it becomes stinky, mold gets on it, it becomes smelly. You throw it away, or not unlike the sugar, you send it to compost. But what industry buys brand new cheese, sits it on the shelf, and can't wait for it to get smelly and gross to make their product? Any anglers? Any cat fishermen? What is cheese bait? What is stink bait? So here, on one side of the street, or one side of the state, or one side of the nation, smelly, rotten cheese is a big, big problem. And on the other side of the nation, they're buying brand new, perfect cheese and just wishing it would hurry up and get smelly and rotten to make their product. Here's a good Pennsylvania one. I was born and raised in central Kansas. Where are the salt mines in the United States? Western PA, central Kansas. Not unlike coal mining or any other type of underground mining, you go in, you excavate the minerals or the resources, and when they leave, it's all done, they have these abandoned underground mines. What's present? Attributes, characteristics, and engineering. Stable temperature, stable humidity, unbelievable security, it's hundreds of feet underground. All the things they're spending hundreds of dollars a square foot to build on top of the ground for document storage. So instead of using new steel and new stuff to build it on top of the ground, can we not just reclaim or repurpose these old salt mines? Notice lower right picture. What color is the ceiling? It's white. So that is a reclaimed salt mine for document storage. We've already picked on the FAA once, so we're going to pick on the FAA twice. So we, as a repurposer, you love highly regulated industries. USDA, FAA, DOD, because they have very aggressive rules and stuff, because a lot of times lives are at stake. And it's probably good that they have really strict rules. Crazy rule. Paint. Airline paint. You have to open that 5-gallon bucket within 2 years of date of manufacture. And if it's 2 years and 1 day, you can't paint an airliner. So at 1 year, 364 days, we can open up the 5-gallon bucket, the blue paint, and paint the Airbus A350. At 2 years and 1 day, most of it is sent out as hazardous waste and burned. Attributes, characteristics, and engineering. Paint obviously adheres, it sticks. You know, your car paint, what is it? 80 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour, maybe 150 miles an hour? A jetliner, 550 miles an hour. So it's super, super sticky. Another attribute of airline paint, or all those kinds of paints, is it flexes as the temperature increases and decreases. So here in Pennsylvania, your car might be 100 degrees in the summer, but you have to wait 6 months for it to get 10 below. But over that time period, that paint flexes. Contrast that with an airliner. He takes off in the summer at Heathrow in London. How does he get to Phoenix, Arizona? Over the North Pole in 8 hours. Minus 60, minus 70 over the North Pole. He lands in Phoenix, 120. And that's the air temperature on the concrete tarmac. It's probably 140, 150. Just think about how much flexing that paint had to do. But yet, FAA rules are, after 2 years, we have to burn it. Why can't we just paint some low-cost structure? I mean, this is amazingly engineered paint, but the airline industry doesn't know the farmer in Iowa who needs to paint his tractor or paint his barn. So we just, I don't know what, mindlessly or lazily, but you could argue mindlessly and lazily. It's already been amortized, it's paid for, it's off the books, let's just send it to be burned. Any horse people? Oh, the spoiler. So, off-track thoroughbreds. Thoroughbreds are made to run races and run really fast, win the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness. But, like all performance animals, only a certain percentage make it. And what do you do with a horse that doesn't run fast enough? Lower right is Blackfoot Mystery. First 3 races, finished dead last. 3 for 3, dead last. Sucked as a racehorse. Was retired as a racehorse, but got repurposed into a show jumping horse. And think about attributes, characteristics, and engineering. In its second life, it was jumping. It was never asked to jump in life number 1. And so good was Blackfoot Mystery, was the gold medal winner in 2016 in the Olympics as a show jumper, life number 2. So we often get asked, does repurposing make more sense economically or environmentally? Environmentally, if you're a source company and you have paint, if you have cheese, if you have sugar, outdoor signs, it's great when there's a repurpose for it because you don't have to landfill it. You can do something else with it instead of landfill it. Certainly buying stuff used, whether you buy used vehicles, used clothes, everything I'm wearing today is from a thrift store. You typically save 50 to 75%, so it makes sense both ways. Said another way, repurposing is at the intersection of affordability and sustainability. And with that, I conclude, and we've got just a few minutes, so is there any questions that I could entertain? Yes, sir.
I'm coming.
Oh, she's coming. She's repurposing those dress shoes as running shoes.
Have any suggestions for plastic pallets?
Yeah, call me. That's the suggestion. Call me. Yeah, so interestingly, wood pallets, that's the majority, but plastic pallets, there are a lot of them. So with plastic pallets, there's lightweight single trippers that usually get cracked. They're light loads, and so they don't spend a lot of money on their pallets. But there's some industries that are putting 2,000 and 3,000 pounds on that pallet, and they have to be strong. Excellent second lives for plastic pallets. So just a couple examples. Hay farmers. Anybody with livestock, instead of sitting their hay on the ground to absorb moisture and ruin the bottom layer of the hay, they like to put pallets out there to set it on, to create a buffer, an air gap. And a wood pallet, you step on it wrong, you break your ankle. Plastic pallets are great for that, so call me.
So a question about some of the supply chain issues around this. So do you know of any particular examples of organizations that address this in the waste stream itself, so that it sort of gets handled at the back end from the
Yeah.
point of view?
Yeah, so I'm not sure I'm going to answer your question exactly as you ask it, but it's interesting. So there's three things in conflict. So we're at a sustainability conference and everybody wants to be greener, landfill diversion. That's all the buzzwords, all the CEOs, all the annual reports talk about sustainability. So keep it out of the landfill. Let's put that here. Across the street are two things. Liability is huge. Because what happens if I give that to somebody else and let's think about American Airlines. We can talk about that because it's not going to happen. If they give that old evacuation slide to somebody and they go out on a lake, a hole's in it and a kid drowns, who's liable? Most big well, I shouldn't say most. Lots and lots of big companies will throw that away rather than risk the liability. So that's a conflict. The other is good old profit and loss. If it costs more, so let's go back to the example of the aluminum bleachers. It's much faster to scrape all those aluminum bleachers with a track hoe and recycle them. The higher and better use is reuse, but with reuse you have to typically deconstruct versus demolish. Very much more labor intensive. We got to unbolt every bleacher. We got to stack it. And most companies, lots of companies, I want it gone in the cheapest way possible. So lots and lots and lots of doublespeak, greenwashing, all the words we know about, but happens all the time. So not sure that exactly answered the question, but there's tension, absolutely. We say one thing, but we don't want the liability, so throw it away. It costs more money, throw it away.
Have you seen anything interesting done with windmill blades?
The big wind turbine blades is a very, very common one. So that's an interesting one because here's a very, very green industry, wind energy. Big producer of waste. So these get retired. What happens to them? Huge problem and growing problem in America. I don't know of a great solution, especially in supply demand. There's way more supply than there is demand. Now there's incremental demand. If you Google, you all have smartphones, Google wind turbine blade playgrounds, Netherlands. Some very, very fascinating. They'll take these old wind and cut them and make them into playgrounds for kids. Great second life. Unfortunately, how many playgrounds do you need? Playgrounds are made to last 30, 40, 50 years. So it's one of those, I liken it to wooden utility spools. So wire that comes in on wooden spools. There is demand by every goat owner in America for an old wooden spool for their goats to play on. Unfortunately, the electrical companies and everybody that's generating these spools are way more generated than there are goat owners. So there's a supply-demand imbalance. And that would be the case with the wind turbine blades. To date, there is no repurpose that anywhere near keeps up with demand.
Thank you for a great presentation.
Thank you.
I have two questions. One is, do you have to have increased liability insurance? Does anybody ever come after you? And the second is, as a business model, as a business Not that you want, you necessarily want that.
Here's my business plan, guys. Take notes. This is the most important thing. So far, 14 years of doing this, nothing's ever come back on it. Usually there's some document, chain of custody break, so if we're dealing with something from McDonald's, there's a chain of custody, and then we sell it to our customers. I'm not saying it won't happen. So to date, from a liability perspective, nothing has happened. Is it scalable? Well, my entrepreneurial story is in 2010 with no grand visions, 0 grand visions. I had a guy say, hey, an old billboard vinyl will make a great paint drop cloth in life number 2. I loved the idea. I found 20 of them for sale, put them on Craigslist. That started the company. 14 years later, we have 6 warehouses across the country. So it's scalable because America, land of abundance, has a lot of waste. Got one.
Thank you. Question about your transportation and logistics. How do you organize or engineer a system that is, meeting if halfway across the country the demand exists and the other half is the supply? And how are you even networking to know beyond, the subscriptions, that exist and that there even is a logistical pipeline that's sustainable and not just, some diesel truck that's driving all around the country with a folded up, cloth or something.
Sure.
How does that work?
Yep, I'll take this one as the last one for time. So I will elongate the answer. So if you look on a map, we have a warehouse in Arizona, Colorado, Texas, Iowa, Ohio, South Carolina. So we're within a day's truck drive of the majority of the United States. So if you call from Boston, it's going to go to Ohio. If you call from San Diego, it's going to go to Arizona. So that minimizes, because this is a very, very, very logistically intensive business. So that minimizes it somewhat. To answer your second question, how do you connect the dots from somebody in New Hampshire to somebody in New Mexico? So, one easy, simple answer is you spend a lot of money on advertising. But it's just interesting. People that are resourceful, innovative, they kind of network together. I mean, we have social media, all the traditional things, social media and stuff. And we have a very widely followed newsletter across the United States that we talk about all these stories. So this is, I guess, self-promotion, but if you've liked the concept, sign up for our newsletter, go to our website. But yeah, it's just knowing a lot of people. So one of the things we say, if it's generic, versatile, and adaptable, we'll bring it in, and we have no idea what's going to happen to it. We don't know if it's going to be the cranberry farmer in Arizona, the copper miner in Arizona, or the golf course superintendent in Florida that's going to raise their hand and say, hey, I can use that. But if you show it to a wide enough, diverse enough audience, industrial audience, you got a real good chance at finding a home. My favorite story, in conclusion, we got in Comcast Cable. Anybody ever heard of Comcast Cable? Out there in Colorado, nobody's ever heard of Comcast Cable. But we learned yesterday on a city tour that that's your biggest employer here. They reached out, and this happened to be in Colorado. They had 4-foot by 2-foot, 4-inch thick concrete pads that they would sit out in the subdivisions, put their electronic equipment on it, drill holes in the concrete, and run cable out to each of the houses. So, generic, versatile, and adaptable. I said, yeah, we'll take the risk. We'll try. Because we'll try. It's generic, versatile, adaptable. I thought it'd be used for some agricultural livestock application, but about 2 weeks later, a motor freight carrier, a trucking company, calls and said, we'll buy them all. I said, great, but what are you going to do with these big pieces of concrete with holes in it? He said, well, we're Denver-based, and when we're running light loads, meaning not a lot of weight in the truck, to Wyoming on windy days, our trucks blow over. So we want to add weight or ballast to these trucks so there's less chance that they blow over. We use trucking all the time, but I'm not a trucking operator. I would have never, ever thought of that. But as soon as he saw that, it was an instant solution. So waste from Comcast Cable became a solution for a trucking company. Thank you for your time.